Hi there, it's Mr. Cohen, and I'm coming to you today with a video that might help you think about ways to interpret the poems that you're choosing for the poetry recital project. I've selected a few poems, and I'm going to give you a series of 20-minute videos on each poem. The first poem I'd like to talk about today is Sonnet 29 by Shakespeare. And when I first encounter a poem, I like to look for things. Are there patterns? Are there repetitions? Does the poem have a regular meter to it? Is there rhyme in the poem? Do you see things like assonance, consonance, and alliteration? Are the lines running on, or are they all end stopped? Now, when you deal with a sonnet, as I believe I mentioned in class, we really can divide it up into four sections. And so uh, the first four lines we will call Q1, and the second four lines we'll call Q2, and the third four lines we'll call Q3, short for quatrain, and we'll call the last two lines couplet. Now, Shakespeare sonnets are all metrical. They all have a regular beat to them. And let me just tell you what that is. They are in iambic pentameter. So each line goes five times. Da da. You can see it in the first line here. The first line could go da da when in disgrace with fortune and but really actually maybe at the end of the first line, instead of an I am in the last two syllables, we have, and we mentioned this in class just briefly, what should we call this when in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes? These two seem strong, and so we'll call this a spondy. Da da. And so the point is, it's useful and valuable to uh, pay attention to the meter, to the beat. And there's going to be variations throughout the poem, and finding these variations and figuring out how to say lines that are not perfectly ba-da, will improve, enhance your interpretation of the poem. And so that's one thing to look for, the beat. You notice, like in the second line, I all alone beweep my outcast state. Is that a regular line? Does it go ba-da, 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 ba-da? I all alone beweep my outcast state. That one too, it seems like it goes at the end of the line, da, da, outcast state. The next line seems like it doesn't really, it's not in a specific meter at all, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries. But then in the fourth line, we're back to a very regular meter. And look upon myself and curse my fate. Now, you notice when I read it, I am not getting all sing-songy. I'm not saying, and look upon myself and curse my fate. That's not very attractive. You want to feel the beat, but you don't want to over exaggerate it and look upon myself and curse my fate. So that's meter. We have the first line seems to have a little irregularity. It ends in a spondy, and the second line ends in spondy, and the third line you really can't even clap it. And trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries. And the fourth line is exceedingly regular, and the fifth line starts with uh, a trochee. It goes bada bada, wishing me like. And so these are kind of metrical conversations that if you're dealing with a metrical poem, one of the examples I'll show you later is free verse, and you don't have this question in this discussion. But when you're dealing with a metrical poem, it's good to kind of test each line and to figure out the beat of each line, because half of the lines in Shakespeare are going to have some variation or another. And really, when you can spot it and deal with it and manage the variations, the saying of the lines becomes much more convincing. So let me just say the first four lines. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate. Other things to look at besides the meter is rhyme. And you notice in these sonnets, there's a specific rhyme scheme. It goes eyes and state and cries and fate. And this is just kind of conventional and arbitrary that we put letters. We put an A at the end of the first line always. And then if we have a new rhyme sound at the end of line B, at the end of line 2, we call it B. And then if and we keep going, we would go C here, except the fact that eyes rhymes with cries and state rhymes with fate. Now we go into C, we get a new sound, and it goes just like this, all but one of the Shakespeare sonnets. And so that's the rhyme scheme. And you want to be aware of it as you're saying the poem so that you can kind of connect the rhyming words. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate. You can almost hear eyes and cries. You kind of hold up the eyes at the end of line 1 and connect it with cries at the end of line 3, and same with state and fate. Now, it's so important to know what you're saying, right? You could convincingly scan each line. Scan, that's a fancy word for figuring out the meter of a line. You could scan each line very intelligently and figure out how to make the rhyme pop. But if you're not understanding what you're saying, you're not going to be able to do the highest level job. So let's talk about what we have in the first quatrain. The speaker is talking about when he's in a state of disgrace with fortune. Fortune, it's a common goddess with a blindfold who's got riches in her hands. She's got a blindfold. She is not looking. She just gives out good and bad luck randomly, accidentally. And that's what luck is like. And so the speaker here is in a state of disgrace or shame with fortune. He's got bad luck and men's eyes. He feels that people look down on him. He's all alone, and he cries about his outcast state. And there's some interesting sound effects that are going on here. You notice that we have the st here. It's like kind of complaining and spitting almost. And how to say these three syllables, outcast state. You don't want to make it outcast state because that's just one sound. You want to get both of them. Outcast state. It's kind of like an angry sound, a frustrated sound. Anyway, He's in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes. He's all alone crying about his outcast state, excuse me, and he's troubling heaven. He's bothering heaven. And heaven is deaf to him with his excuse me, with his bootless cries. His cries are not productive or practical. They're not effective. They're not working. They're not reaching heaven. Heaven's deaf to him. His relationship with heaven is that he's basically troubling it. And the fourth line, and look upon myself and curse my fate. He is full of frustration, anger, and self-pity in the first quatrain. And then we get a different topic in the second quatrain. Wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy contented least. And there's some rhyming issue here. Least and possessed, you could fudge it a little bit and say possessed and lest, or not. It hardly matters. Most people just say possessed and least and live without the perfect rhyme. But what's the story in the second quatrain? Here it seems that the speaker in the poem is envious of other men. He wants to be rich in hope. What does that mean? Rich in hope? To have more kind of opportunities in life, and featured like him with the physical, facial beauty like this other guy, and to have friends like him, and he wants this man's art and that man's scope, his skill, intelligence. He is uh, even in the things that he make him happiest, he still is unhappy in the things that make him happy. And so the first quatrain was all about self-pity, and the second is all about envy. He's a miserable fella, the speaker in the first 8 lines. And then we have here, as I mentioned in class when we talked about this poem for just a minute, we have a volta, we have a turn, we have a shift. Yet in these thoughts, myself almost despising, haply, and this haply doesn't mean happily, it means I just so happen to think on you. I think of thee. And then my state, like to the lark at break of day arising from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. Some things to notice going on here. You see here in the second quatrain, we have like these broken lines where you have punctuation right in the middle of the line that really makes you want to pause, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, featured like him, with friends possessed. You really want to take a break. We call these caesuras. And so the poem is really kind of poems move, and this poem in the second quatrain is getting repetitious and stuck, and it's breaking into smaller, more frustrated, less flowing units. As we get into the third quatrain, the movement changes, and we're still kind of with the broken line, the caesura in lines 9 and 10. Yet in these thoughts, and you can put a little caesura there, it feels like you want a little pause there. Yet in these thoughts, myself almost despising, haply I think on thee, and then my state. And then we get to this very, very long line, like to the lark at break of day arising from sullen earth sings hymns at heaven's gate. You cannot stop here. This is a run online, and the motion breaks free of the frustration and it overflows. Line 11 goes over into line 12. You can hear it. Like if I were to read it pausing at the end of the line, it would be wrong. Like to the lark at break of day arising from sullen earth sings hymns at heaven's gate. It wants to go like to the lark at break of day arising from sullen earth. And so you really got to say this in one breath. And so what's the story here? Ooh, I'm miserable, I'm envious, but I just happen to think of you. And then my state, which had been outcast, and this is really kind of a nice repetition. Here the state is outcast, but when I think of you, my state all of a sudden, like just like a lark, which is a beautiful bird that sings a beautiful song, one of the most famous singers among the birds. In Romeo and Juliet, how does it go? Um, Juliet wants Romeo to stay, and Romeo feels he must leave. And they have a little discussion about a bird. Um, Romeo says, it's the lark. That's the bird that sings beautifully in the morning. And Juliet says, no, 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 it's the nightingale. You can stay, Romeo, because that bird song you're hearing, it's still night. But here we have the lark again. Haply I think on thee, and then my state. Like to the lark. His state is just like a lark at break of day rising from sullen earth. It's rising up from the sullen earth, from the kind of dark and depressed earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. And hymns are songs of praise. And so we get heaven again. We had heaven early, the relationship in line 3, we had heaven, and we get it again here in line 12. Earlier, the speaker's relationship with heaven was he troubled heaven, and heaven was deaf to him, and his cries would not reach heaven. But now, he's just like a lark singing hymns at heaven's gate. He's flown all the way up to the gates of heaven, singing hymns. He's not troubling deaf heaven anymore. And why? What was it that brought him back? It's the thoughts of you. And then the couplet wraps it all up here. For thy sweet love, and here the beat is very interesting. It goes, for thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings. We have two spondees in this line. That then I scorn to change my state with kings. And so his state is much improved. This is a love poem. I'm down. I'm unhappy with life. I remember you. And my whole being becomes elevated. And I wouldn't want to change my state with a king. And a king owns everything. So that's Shakespeare's Sonnet 29. I like to print it out and I like to mark it. And I've done that for you here. These are things to pay attention to when facing a poem for the first time. The first question, rhythm and rhyme. Does it have a regular beat to it? And what are the ways in which, as you go through the poem, the beat is twisted, is modified? Here in Shakespeare, the beat is ba-da, 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 ba-da. In most of his plays and all of his sonnets, that's the majority of lines. Ba-da, 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 ba-da. But then you have weird lines like, and trouble deaf heaven with his bootless cries. Sorry, with my bootless cries. It doesn't fall into the da 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 da, and Trouble Death Heaven with my boot, it doesn't beat. Other things I like to look out for. Well, I didn't mention this. It becomes in the third quatrain as the line begins to flow. There's also much more alliteration, consonants. And so, like here, we have like to the lark. We also have like to the lark at break of day rising from sullen earth sings hymns at heaven's gate. And when you hear it and when you see it with your eyes, you can see this K here and this K here and this K here. You can use it to your advantage when you're interpreting. Like to the lark at break of day rising. The k sound is kind of like, it's got like a kind of a drum cymbal quality to it. And like to the lark, the l sound is, it's like we naturally default when we're singing something la 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 la. It's just a nice kind of rolls off your tongue, that sound. And hymns at heaven's gate. So these are some things to look at, some things to think about. I hope watching this 20-minute video kind of helped you get a sense of what you might do if you are faced with a poem and you want to interpret it, which I'm asking you to do for this poetry recital. This is a great poem, Sonnet 29, super famous. And if you'd like to use this one, please do so. Be welcome to. It's a great poem, one of my favorite sonnets. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.